See, that was a quick and harmless break. It's the beauty of radio. See, all it cost you to listen to radio, the last bastion of free speech in the world, a few minutes of your time for a commercial here and there. And it's the one area that can't be controlled by mass media. You know why? Because there are 10,000 little radio stations out there, most of them mom and pop organizations, and a lot of them owned by patriots. And you can't corrupt them all. It's easy when there's only 6 or 8 corporations that pretty much run the mainstream media. They can control everything you see on television. They can control everything you read in all the massive papers in the country. But when you got 10,000 little radio stations out there, wow, a little bit different, isn't it? It's like trying to herd cats. Kind of hard. You know, I'm no fan of the United Nations. You all have heard me decry them as the tyrants and the tin pot dictators that they really are. And you got to admit, the United Nations is a pretty shameful organization. Their alleged peacekeepers have a history of rape and pillage in every place they go in to keep the peace that's worse than the actual people they're going in there to stop their atrocities. I mean, it's literally a joke. It's run by a bunch of people who are sitting in there demanding that the United States do this and do that and pay this and pay for that. They look at us like we're an ATM. We fund 60% of all of the United Nations, single-handedly. And they look at us with absolute, utter disdain. They denounce us. They treat the United States of America like garbage. But you know, there's one guy who's the raconteur for the anti-terrorism organization in the United States. He's their number one counterterrorism guy. And you know what he came out and said the other day? That Edward Snowden's revelations about spying and the treason that is going on, that is being perpetrated not only on Americans, but is a human rights violation that is tantamount to a crime against humanity. And he says he's no traitor. His revelations, quote, are at the very apex of public interest concerns. Our government calls Edward Snowden a traitor. I disagree. Edward Snowden is no traitor. What Edward Snowden did was come out and literally open the eyes, I should say, and awaken literally tens of millions of Americans to the danger of where we are in our rapid descent into tyranny and fascism. And mark my words, fascism is the word. We may not be around to read it in the history books that are written once freedom is restored in the United States through the efforts of patriots like me and you. But mark my words, somewhere down the road, the truth is going to out that this was the time when liberty and freedom descended into fascism. And this guy came out and smacked the nail right on the head. Here's what he had to say. The astonishing suggestion that this sort of responsible journalism can somehow be equated with aiding and abetting terrorism needs to be scotched decisively. Translation into American English? I can't believe that this government of the United States is equating this action by a responsible journalist with aiding and abetting terrorism. He went on to say, it is the role of a free press to hold governments to account. And yet there have even been outrageous suggestions from some conservative MPs in Britain that the Guardian newspaper should face a criminal investigation. It has been disheartening to see some tabloids giving prominence to this nonsense. So let me break this out for you. This guy is actually telling the truth. The role of the free press, which has long ago been abandoned by the Ministry of Propaganda, that literally has a hotline fax machine straight out of the White House. They're not telling you news. They're not doing investigative journalism. They're simply recounting that which the government hands them. They are propagandists. And you're taking it in. Garbage in, garbage out. It's an old phrase. If you baked a loaf of bread and you put dog excrement in there, is it going to be tasty when it comes out of the oven fully baked? I don't think so. When you put garbage in, you get garbage out. And if you're not utilizing critical thinking skills to see around, to read between the lines, to educate yourself, to inform yourself, to be able to build and develop your own opinion and not parrot those of others, then you're allowing the garbage to control you. Snowden disclosed, quote, issues at the very apex of public interest concerns. And the astonishing suggestion that this sort of responsible journalism can somehow be equated with aiding and abetting terrorism needs to be ended. It is the role of a free press to hold governments to account. And yet there have been outrageous suggestions that from some conservative ministers of parliament that the Guardian should face a criminal investigation. It has been disheartening to see some tabloids give prominence to this nonsense. Did you know that the British government went into the Guardian's newspaper facility, their headquarters, and forced them while they watched for the Guardian's editor-in-chief, his name is Alan Rusbridger, and they forced him to go down into the basement with them where they had hard drives with the data stored on there from Snowden. And they required him, forced him, coerced him to destroy them with a hammer in front of them because he wouldn't turn it over. You see, in England, there is no freedom of the press. They don't have the right, like we have here, to protect your sources. And in the United States of America, imagine the outcry if the federal government went over to the New York Times or the LA Times or the Chicago Tribune or the Wall Street Journal and said, we've got to watch you destroy these hard drives. Now, the truth of the matter is, listen, our media in this country has to walk this fine line. Here's the problem, and this is really the crux of it. And it doesn't just apply to media. This applies to everyone who is alive and breathing. The number one failure of human nature is simply this: people don't want to admit they've been wrong. And newspapers and magazines and television tabloid organizations and news aspects, news outlets, and journalism in general wants even less to admit that. You know why? Because they're the guys who so sycophantically pump this guy up to be the coming of the Messiah. And now, in order to admit their wrongness, in order to admit the fact that they promoted and pumped this guy and crowned him, they would have to admit they were wrong. And the one failing of all human nature is that no one wants to stand up and say, you know what, I was wrong, and the advice I gave you was wrong, and I misled you. Erroneously or on purpose, whatever, makes no difference. The truth of the matter is, you were relying upon me to give you information, and I did the wrong thing. Well, it's all about credibility, they say. No, you see, the truth is, the media has no credibility. Because everyone recognizes that they're not really telling you the truth anymore. Everyone recognizes that there's no more investigative journalism. There's no level of credibility. That's gone, like smoke in the wind. Now we have to sift through the rubble of what they give us to try to identify, to find one piece of bread, one crumb of value. And more often than not, it's couched and buried under layers of lies and deceit and dog excrement. The truth of the matter is, they can't come out now and say, you know what? You've been trusting us to tell you the truth. You've been trusting us to expose government. You've been trusting us to act in the role of the free press, to hold governments to account. And we let you down. We lied to you. We misled you. We abused our privilege, our fiduciary responsibility to you. We took your money. And we fed you lies. And we knew they were lies, but we fed them to you anyway because it met our bias. That, ladies and gentlemen, is an apology you will never hear. Now when their credibility slips, they have to come out and do something. I mean, obviously, the mask is off. Nobody can pretend any longer that things aren't going awry. So they leak a little here and they leak a little there and they give you a little crumb here and they give you a little drip of water there. See, we've got credibility. We talked about the NSA spying scandal. Yeah, but you skimmed over the surface, and you used the word NSA, and you used the word spy, and you used the word scandal, but that's about as far as it went. And then you supported the idea that ultimately it's the government's right to do that to keep us safe. Why, you sycophantic, two-bit, no-good, scheming, conniving liar. If you call that journalistic integrity, you should be ashamed of yourself. What did you spend all those years in college learning? Oh, that's right. You were educated by a professor who told you that this is really in your best interest to do it this way. Forget your conscience. Forget your morals. Forget your integrity. Forget your honor. What matters is the bottom line and whether or not you get access to the White House. Because if you write this bad story, you know you're never going to get another interview. My God. The truth of the matter is, what Edward Snowden did was a boon for the people of the world. No, not for the elitists who want to control and dominate you. Not those people. Those people don't have your best interest at heart. You are food to them. You are a crop grown. They're farmers. You are livestock to be bought and sold and traded and occasionally culled when your usefulness has expired, like a rancher and his cattle. You're a sheep to be shorn multiple times a year as the need arises, and they pay attention to you only around in November when you get a little scrap of food so that they can get back into power. 90% of all incumbents get reelected. How is that? How exactly does that work? Congress has an approval rating, came out the other day in a poll, of 6%. 6%. Now, let's analyze that for a moment. 6%. When you got a nation of 300 million people, and only about half of which are actually registered to vote, that's 150 million. The truth is that the whole presidency was only elected by, 52 million. So let's give it the benefit of the doubt and say half. That was half. That's 100 million people who actively voted in that election. So if you take voters that are out there, there's 100 million of them. 6% of them approve of Congress. Now, look, for the record, more than 6 million people live in Manhattan. Okay? And in the total number of people that currently work for the federal government, the truth is that the actual number of people that are employed by the federal federal government itself are 4.3 million people. So let's take that now in the context of 6 million people who actually support Congress, recognizing that 4.3 million of them actually work for the government. This adds a whole new irony to the friends and family plan, doesn't it? It's not even everyone who's employed in the federal government and their spouses. I mean, these numbers are so low, and yet Congress is routinely, consistently reelected somewhere between 86 and 90%. This country backed the Titanic up and then ran ahead full steam, damn the torpedoes, right back into the iceberg again. In 2012, when we put this sycophantic dictator back into power. And we gave him a second crack at destroying our economy and destroying our society and destroying the fabric of our Constitution and bankrupting our nation and involving us in foreign conflicts we have no business in cutting treaties that are against the nation's best interest, in signing us into a corporatocracy that's leading us to a new world order that can't possibly benefit you. The truth of the matter is, we need another million Snowdens. We need all these generals that have been expunged and purged out of the military to come forth and say, here's what I know, and hang the consequences. Here's what I know. We need NSA people to come forth and say, listen, I know that my life is going to be trashed as a result of this, but I'm going to tell the truth. We need people who work in Congress, for Congress, and come forth and say, listen, I know that Dianne Feinstein is a what? A liar, a thief, a con woman. We need people to come forth from the White House and say, you know what? The president knew in advance that he was lying to the American people, and I've got the proof right here because I told him. We need people to come forth out of the court system and say, this judge knew empirically that that man or woman was innocent, and they allowed that trial to go on. We need people in state motor vehicle departments to come forth and say, listen, they're implementing Real ID in Missouri even though there's a law against it. And I know that my future is trashed and I know my career is trashed, but guess what? The future of the nation is worth it. We need Americans to stand up and say, I will not stand for tyranny, domination, subjugation, slavery. We need Americans to say, I will pledge my life, my fortune, and my sacred honor to save this nation. We need people to say, whatever the cost, this nation is worthy of that sacrifice. And I will speak, and I will act, and I will protest, and I will organize. I will educate, I will inform others, even when I know I am putting myself at risk. And I'm not telling you to do something I don't believe in. I'm not telling you to do something I don't do myself. Listen to the last 4 segments and tell me somebody's not recording this somewhere, putting it in my dossier. I know they are. And I know that at some point in time, and it won't be long from now, I will pay the price. Again. But this nation, my children, my grandchildren, my great-great-great-grandchildren, who I have no hope of meeting, their opportunity to live in freedom and liberty and to carry on that torch and hand it off to the next generation, they are worth it. Your freedom is worth it. And I'm not one of those people who willingly throws himself on the altar of altruism. I don't believe in the collective. But I believe in you. I believe in you. And even if you don't agree with me, even if you don't like what I say, if you don't like how I think, if you don't like what I stand for, I would put my life on the altar to give you that right. You've been listening to America's Voice. My name is Michael Evans. I'm pleading with you, America, to wake up. We'll see you tomorrow morning. Have a great day. God bless it, each and every one of you. Do the right thing. Everywhere. All the time. Even when no one else is looking. Always.